Her Majesty the Queen
has asked me to form
a government,
and I have accepted.
I accepted.
I have accepted.
I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government.
As the lectern is safely put away, the fourth Conservative Prime Minister in 12 years of government takes over. Will Liz Truss's plans to ease the energy crisis determine if she stays in office longer than any of the previous three? Prime Minister Truss told the country she'll get Britain working again, help with your energy bills and put the NHS on what she calls a firm footing. Can she do it? We'll ask what her new top team tells us about how she will run the country. We'll talk to her campaign ally, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith. And we're still trying to get details about how her plan to cap energy bills will actually help you, and if it will slap tens of billions on government borrowing. Our economics editor will take us through it.
The offer for households is massive, but can the PM deliver on it and promise tax cuts without spooking the markets?
We will ask one of the new Prime Minister's economic advisers. We're also in Bolsover in Derbyshire, one of the seats Boris Johnson took from Labour, talking to small businesses about their future.
I am terrified. We are in danger of losing the business without the stability that we need.
And we've a panel of political pundits, it wouldn't be Newsnight without one, to discuss the challenges ahead for the new administration. Good evening. Liz Truss and her top team have little time to get right the plan that stops energy bills going up even further. But can she reassure voters, you, that more help is coming, while also reassuring the markets that the help is responsibly given? Tonight, we'll bring you the latest on what we know at this point about her energy price freeze, because it's the biggest anxiety for many people and it's what matters most to you. We'll also explore what it might mean for the public finances, the profits of energy firms, and what impact it could have on our use of gas and electricity. We'll hear shortly from our political editor, Nick Watt, in Downing Street, where our new Prime Minister is tonight finalising her cabinet. First, Nick's got details of who's got the big jobs so far in Liz Truss's team and how they might affect you and your life.
Assuming the mantle, but which Liz Truss will be to the fore? An inclusive Liz Truss, assembling a team of rivals? Or a tribal Liz Truss, relying on core supporters? Signals on day one that may well tell us how this premiership will pan out.
A noisy reception as Liz Truss makes her way into Downing Street after travelling pretty much the length and breadth of Britain after her meeting with the Queen. All of that took longer than normal, which means she will now want to show this is a Prime Minister hitting the ground running.
Step one, and cheerio to the Rishi Sunak contingent in the cabinet, though one survives. And hello to Liz Truss's closest lieutenants and supporters who bag the top slots.
Some pretty gloomy, now ex-cabinet ministers drowning their sorrows over there right now, and rising anger in the Rishi Sunak camp. One supporter, who's still just about a minister, told me Liz Truss is purging us. She is actively dividing the party. And is that wise when she only got 57% of the vote? But then this minister said there's the old saying associated with Margaret Thatcher, if you stand in the middle of the road, maybe you get knocked down. So maybe Liz Truss is onto something.
A happy Truss camp.
Do you think she can unite this party?
Oh, I think the party will unite. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all.
Now, I know you're somebody who doesn't like socialists. Do you think a £100 billion plan to help with energy plans, is that a bit of state intervention?
No, I think I don't know what the plan is, you don't know, but I'm sure what it is will be right.
What I'm saying is Liz is doing is putting her compassionate arm around the people of this great nation, because ultimately this is a once-in-a-generation type event. We haven't seen this level of scale for need of support since the Second World War, to be perfectly frank.
Is she working to unite a divided party?
I think she is, and I think actually what's important is it's the Conservative MPs accept the result of the election of the leadership, which I think they have done, will always rally behind, because our enemy, as far as I'm concerned, is the Labour Party.
A warning from the past.
It's time now for everybody to get behind the Prime Minister, to face one way and to go in one direction. And my big fear is the Conservative Parliamentary Party, which is very lightweight, very fractious, very factionalised and very panic-prone. And that, I think, is going to be her biggest problem. I mean, the dreadful challenges she faces, I think she will, over time, cope. But the Conservative Parliamentary Party, God help her.
And Labour unmoved by what they saw today.
We need to know the detail, and I'm afraid to say we didn't get detail in the speech. OK, it wasn't a budget. I get that. We didn't get poetry either. We didn't get any sort of inspiration. I didn't get any sort of vision other than she wants Britain to be Aspiration Britain. Well, goodness me, who doesn't want that? Of course I want Aspiration Britain. I'm afraid to say I think the only way to get Aspiration Britain is with a new government, and obviously I would prefer to see a Labour government.
I am determined to deliver. Thank you.
A declaration of intent. Smiles for now, but many in her fractured party are calling for greater healing.
And Nick still in Downing Street. Now, there are some Rishi Sunak supporters not very happy tonight. What's going on, Nick?
And also, Victoria, happiness in other areas of the party. A key Boris Johnson supporter, Johnny Mercer, who was the Minister for Veteran Affairs, that gave him a seat in Cabinet. He was sacked. He went home and told his wife that Liz Truss gave no good explanation for why he was sacked. And so Felicity Cornelius Mercer tweeted that Liz Truss was an imbecile. And as you say, Victoria, very unhappy members of the Rishi Sunak camp. I was speaking to one aide, senior aide, to one of those cabinet ministers who was sacked, and they said this is a total car crash, but maybe we are better off out of this. And I was talking to one sort of Sunak minister who's still clinging on, and they raised some doubts about the central plank of Liz Truss's economic policy. That is to cut taxes, keep spending and fill the gap with borrowing. And this minister said to me, maybe this economic experiment will work, or maybe there'll be a run on the pound and we'll have to go to the IMF.
Wow, well, I might put that to her economic advisor in the next few minutes. What are Downing Street saying?
Well, allies of Liz Truss are saying absolutely the Prime Minister is bringing this party together, and they're pointing out, these allies, that by the time the Prime Minister has completed her cabinet reshuffle, there will be 5 leadership contenders sitting around that table in addition to her. So that's Suella Braverman, Penny Mordaunt, Nadhim Zahawi, Kemi Badenoch, not announced yet, but Tom Tugendhat. And this ally said, look, they all clashed during that leadership contest. Suella Braverman on the Brexit right, Tom Tugendhat on the sort of the one nation left, sitting round the same cabinet table. But of course, no Rishi Sunak. Well, what these allies are saying about why those people have been sacked is, well, Michael Ellis, he's still going to be there. He's going to be Attorney General. He is a Rishi Sunak backer. But why did some of the others go? Well, I'm told they didn't do themselves any favours with Liz Truss. Victoria.
Cheers, Nick. Thank you. Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, who today turned down a cabinet post after deciding, as he put it, he wouldn't add value to the roles offered. Is he comfortable with the scale of borrowing the new Prime Minister is reportedly about to propose?
We've got the two things coming together, the aftermath of COVID and, of course, the problems as a result of Russia's aggression and the cutting off of the gas. And this is making life for people very difficult. So you have to, when those sort of events hit you, you must deal with them as they are, but also believe that you need to be able to get the economy growing. And so free marketeering is about keeping the economy growing, but also dealing with events. That's the key.
But I was asking you, are you comfortable with such vast borrowing?
Well, no one's ever comfortable with huge and excessive borrowing, but these last 4 years have seen that because of the events that go on. The alternative to that is to say to people, well, of course, you just have to make do. And of course, many people will find it very difficult and impossible. So government is there at the end of the day to behave responsibly and make sure they can protect people from the worst excesses at times. But at the same time, also, they have to ensure that the future is about a growing economy that provides jobs and income for people. So those are the two things they balance together.
But as long as the war in Ukraine continues, then wholesale gas prices could remain high. They could go even higher. I mean, is the party comfortable with subsidising energy bills for an indefinite period of time, a lengthy period of time?
Well, first of all, we don't know exactly what the government will do in response to this. My instinct here of what I've heard is that they will do a bold move to make sure that they protect people, particularly the most vulnerable, who have no savings or anything to draw upon. But the reality is we have to deal with the events as they are, not as we might wish them to be. And the truth is, the last 4 years, the government has been hit now by two major crises, which are not of their particular making, but are actually external events that have caused them. And not alone, Germany's going into recession, France is in difficulty, Italy's screaming about breaking the sanctions and getting Russian gas. All these things are causing nightmares all over the place.
Sure. But are you comfortable with subsidising energy bills for as long as the war in Ukraine goes on, for example?
Well, as she said at the time during the course of the campaign, she will take whatever decisions are necessary to make sure people are protected. That's the first requirement of a government. That you must ensure you do what you can. I'm not, when you say the use word comfortable, I'm not comfortable with having to borrow more money. But I still recognise that this may be necessary to make sure we protect people against the worst excesses that are going on. That's good government, whichever way you cut it.
Understood. Let me ask you, I mean, that's a one-off cost, although we don't know how long it would go on for. Unfunded tax cuts of around 30 billion a year are not a one-off cost, they are permanent. And Liz Truss says those tax cuts will lead to higher growth. I want to ask you, I genuinely, I need to know the answer to this from you. What is it about the previous Conservative administration or the one before that that didn't realise the solution to great growth was so straightforward?
No, running an economy is always a balancing act. And what you have to do is recognise that there are times when you need to be able to support people through borrowing, and whether you can afford that borrowing is critical. By the way, we have a lower ratio of debt to GDP than most of the European nations do. So there is a bit of scope in that. We are a reliable nation to repay our debts. And some of it's been factoring away as well, because 2/3 of the debt is actually not index linked, which means it's being inflated away at a rapid rate. So there are some positives in all of this. The second thing is that there is some headroom there to reduce the burden of taxation. You can't tax your way into growth. You have to make sure people have more of their own money in their pockets to be able to cope with those changes and to keep the economy growing. That's the critical thing. What we don't want is, and this is what's unique about right now, we don't want to end up with higher inflation, higher interest rates, and a recession at the same time, and a deep one at that, because that means everybody will get incredibly badly hit. So we need to find ways to ensure that that economy grows, and taxation is critical to that. We need to get that burden down as far as we possibly can.
Let me ask you about the makeup of the cabinet so far. Rishi Sunak supporters, Dominic Raab, Grant Shapps, Steve Barclay, they've all been purged. They've all gone. Is it wise for a Prime Minister to only have people in their top team who are on their side?
Well, I think the number one thing that a Prime Minister has to do is make sure that they have people, first and foremost, that they believe can deliver the job. In this particular case, the government has no more than 18 months and some very big issues to deal with in the meantime. So delivering on what they want to do and at the same time dealing with those issues mean we need to have competent personnel running those departments. So first and foremost, Prime Minister must make sure people can run the department that they're on. They're up against a tight schedule. Second thing at the moment is that the party has to come together now after the leadership election. Leadership election is always divisive. There will be jobs for people who are supporting other candidates. There are already jobs for people in that mix. But she needs to be certain that the people that she wants are the ones that she trusts and can do it. I mean, that's normal in every administration, whether you're in opposition or you are, as it were, in government. And that's, I think, her case. So I don't know what the outcome is. We'll see who she finally puts in into all these posts, but they have to be people that she trusts. I declined to come in for reasons that are my own, but other than that, I'm sure she'll get a full acceptance.
Thank you very much for talking to us tonight.
Pleasure.
Well, the new Chancellor is Kwasi Kwarteng, And he has invited bank bosses to a meeting tomorrow morning as he lays the ground for what Liz Truss today promised will be swift government action to tackle the cost of living crisis. Full details of the package are expected to come on Thursday. Amid the expectation, the government could be preparing to borrow more than $100 billion to shield households from the soaring cost of energy. Millions of families and businesses are awaiting details of the deal. But where would such a massive bailout leave the UK's finances? Our economics editor Ben Chews at the Newsnight will. Ben.
Yes, Victoria, it seems the energy support package for households and businesses this week is set, as you said, to be actually well north of £100 billion. And the latest briefings suggest it will be directly funded by extra government borrowing. Combined with this, we're expecting confirmation of £30 billion of permanent unfunded tax cuts next week. So it's time to ask the question, as the fiscal consequences of this big squeeze on living standards come into view, what does it mean for the public finances? What would it mean for the government's fiscal rules? Liz Truss suggested in the leadership campaign that her various fiscal commitments could all be accommodated within the £30 billion of headroom the Office for Budget Responsibility projected against those rules for 2025 in March. But March was a very long time ago. Most economists doubt that headroom previously identified by the OBR is still there. And if the government is indeed taking on new energy market liabilities on the scale indicated, we would almost certainly blow right through it. It's important to bear in mind why we have fiscal rules. They're, of course, to impose discipline on the public finances, but also to send a signal to financial markets that that discipline exists. And some feel something troubling has been happening to UK assets in global financial markets in recent weeks, as it became clearer Liz Truss was likely to be the new PM. In August, sterling slid 4.5% against the dollar, down to $1.16, one of the worst single months for the pound against the US currency since the aftermath of the 2016 Brexit referendum. Part of this was due to the strengthening of the dollar, which has been shooting up against just about every currency this year. But sterling also slid around 3.5% in value against the euro, the yellow line here, suggesting this is more than just a strong dollar story. There's another piece of evidence. The traded price of UK government debt, known as bonds, has fallen sharply over recent weeks, pushing the yield or effective interest rate on those bonds up. The yield on 2-year UK government bonds, which you can see on the left, rose 1.4 percentage points in August, and on 10-year government bonds, shown on the right, it went up 1.1 percentage points. Now, that might not sound that much, but in the bond market, it really is a sizable change, and it instantly pushes up the government's cost of borrowing. Now, it's true government bond yields are rising in most developed countries as traders expect central banks to hike interest rates to peg back spiking inflation. But as this shows, bond market yields rose more in August in the UK than in peer economies like France in pink and Germany shown in yellow. It's this data, combined with the slide in sterling, that have caused some market watchers to see a new risk premium being priced into UK assets. And they identify Liz Truss's pledges on unfunded tax cuts as the likely cause. Now, let's be clear, this doesn't mean we are heading into a national financial crisis. It doesn't mean the government can't afford one-off expenditures, even very large ones, such as household energy support packages. But some do fear large, permanent, unfunded tax cuts and perhaps a trade war with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol could weaken the economy, stoke inflationary pressures and make life more difficult for the UK in financial markets.
Reductions in taxes over the longer term, which are not matched by appropriate changes in government spending and essentially open up a sustained fiscal deficit, will, I think, raise questions about what happens further out, and will that be associated with higher inflation, actions which undermine the value of the government's promise to repay, and in particular for a foreign investor, what happens to sterling.
So we could be looking at a further slide in the value of our currency and higher interest rates on government borrowing than otherwise. What would all that mean for ordinary households and firms? Well, to put it mildly, it would make our ability to navigate the stormy seas of this economic crisis more difficult. Victoria.
Lot to absorb there. Let's try and make sense of all of that with Dr. Gerard Lyons. He is one of the economists advising the new Prime Minister and helped shape the thinking on these plans. Thank you very much for talking to us, Dr. Lyons. Welcome to Newsnight. You've written today that Liz Truss has to articulate clearly her new policy agenda in order to calm the markets. Is there a risk that she lays out the details of the plans and it doesn't calm the markets?
Well, good evening. It's great to be on the show. Yeah, there's a number of target audiences for the new Prime Minister. Obviously, the general public, businesses and firms, but the financial markets is a very key one. And as you've just heard, financial markets globally, not just in the UK, have been very turbulent this year. We see a very strong dollar. So it's not just a weak pound. Indeed, the Japanese yen is at a quarter-of-century low, and yields are rising everywhere. So the new Prime Minister needs to basically outline her policy. The markets need to understand what the policy is. So it's both basically what the Prime Minister says and does that matters really. In my view, because we've had a period where the market's been waiting for the new Prime Minister to unveil the policy, once the markets start to see the new policy being unveiled, I think they will be reassured, and in particular by three things. By her energy policy, which I think will start to stabilise the situation domestically and start to remove the fear of a deep recession. Second, she'll make clear that the Bank of England is independent, will have the ability still to set independently monetary policy and get on top of inflation. And then third, her fiscal policies, which are the key, as you've been touching on, they're about stabilising the economy.
Right. But as Ben's just explained, there is not much evidence that the markets like what they're hearing so far.
Well, actually, let's look at the situation. 10-year bond yields in the UK have risen. That means it's more expensive to borrow. But they're 3.09% in the UK. We borrow at less than the US still borrows. So we need to accept that borrowing yields have risen over the last year. But compared to inflation of over 10%, the UK government can still borrow at a very cheap rate. And it's also important to bear in mind that the maturity of our debt is twice the length, say, of Germany's government debt. So that makes us in a far better situation. What, though, is really key is that the markets need to see what the policy agenda is. And it's a tighter monetary policy to curb inflation and a looser fiscal policy to both address the energy crisis and to prevent a deep recession. Remember, the borrowing here is for a right reason. It's to prevent a recession. When you say 30 billion of unfunded tax cuts, let's remember the UK was, in this year, the only G7 country planning to raise taxes into a global downturn.
That is true. That is true. But so let me ask you, will your plan, Liz Truss's plan, will that stave off a recession? Is that what you're telling us tonight?
A deep recession was inevitable if we didn't address the energy price crisis, and if we went ahead with the tax increases. By actually putting a cap on energy prices and by not going ahead with the tax increases, and indeed by cutting taxes further, that will undoubtedly prevent a deep recession. Now, the world economy is going to a downturn. If we're lucky, we will prevent any recession, but in all likelihood, what we're seeing here is maybe ensuring that the recession is shallow and short-lived. So there's no doubt that what we're seeing is a significant change. You had a member of the OBR talking there. What we've seen in the UK since 2008, and we've seen this across Western Europe as well, is very weak growth.
Okay.
The orthodoxy is that because our growth rate is weak, more of the budget deficits is structural as opposed to cyclical. That led to the failed austerity policies that were wrong a decade ago, and it's led to the failed policies of raising taxes in the last 2 years.
Right.
What Liz Truss is saying is that we need to turn this on the head and go for a pro-growth strategy. And very significantly for the markets is that that will show that tax revenues rise and debt to GDP ratios will come down, ensuring fiscal discipline.
Help me, help our audience. I don't understand why all governments everywhere don't just cut taxes, because you're saying it will automatically, inevitably lead to higher growth. I mean, you make it sound so simple.
It depends on your starting position. Certainly, you don't actually raise taxes, as we've seen. What you actually need, and what Truss economics is about, is most having a triple arrow approach to policy. You actually have monetary policy curbing inflation, keeping that in check. You have fiscal policy ensuring fiscal discipline and stabilising the economy.
Okay.
And then you have a supply side agenda. But the supply side agenda has to be focused. It's not just about tax cuts to empower people. It's very much about fiscal policy to boost investment and to raise the trend rate of growth. What we're arguing here is very much about turning on its head the idea that Britain is a low growth, low productivity, low wage economy. The only way you can turn that on its head, and therefore, as you've asked in your question, show that tax cuts work, is by actually putting this in an overall strategy where you basically empower people and you actually try and encourage firms to invest more.
Okay.
It's about why countries do it is basically to try and raise the trend rate of growth. But very importantly, you have to keep the markets on side. And as I've said earlier, UK borrowing yields, while they have risen, are still relatively low.
Sure.
But we need to make sure the policy has credibility. So it's basically not only outlining the policy, but delivering upon it.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Dr. Gerard Lyons. Now, as Boris Johnson left Downing Street this morning for the last time as Prime Minister, his parting shot was a speech line many have interpreted as a thinly veiled suggestion of his intention to return. Comparing himself to the Roman statesman Cincinnatus, Mr Johnson said he was preparing to return to his plough. For those like me who are unfamiliar with the classics, the gag, of course, is that Cincinnatus later returned from the farm, summoned to form a new government by a population desperate to have his leadership. Whether the comparison proves accurate depends, many believe, on Liz Truss's ability to win the hearts and minds of those who formed the unprecedented coalition of voters won to her predecessor's Conservative Party. We'll talk about her prospects of doing so in a few minutes with a panel of pundits. First, our UK editor, Seema Katecha, has been talking to people in the Derbyshire town of Bolsover.
In 2019, the Tories took seats that had been in Labour hands for generations. Like this constituency of Bolsover in Derbyshire, represented by the Labour veteran Dennis Skinner, known as the Beast of Bolsover, for almost half a century. But Boris Johnson's mantra of getting Brexit done, along with his levelling up agenda, led many here to vote Tory, turning this seat from red to blue. These ladies are enjoying a midweek lunch at the Coffee Cup Cafe.
I voted for Boris because I wanted him to get Brexit through, and I thought he might be able to do it, which he did. You know, I mean, I've got nothing against him in that respect. But now you lose confidence in people, and I lost confidence in him.
Are you going to vote Tory again?
I don't know. This is what I don't know now. They all promise things, but when they get in, they forget the promises.
As part of Tory levelling up funds, Bolsover has received millions of pounds and is bidding for more.
Well, it has made it a little better. I'm not saying a lot better, but it has been a help, yeah.
Have you noticed a difference?
I have in Bolsover, yes. And you have, haven't you? Noticed how Bolsover's altered these last few years.
Yeah, it's got better.
Yeah,
it's got better. Bolsover's definitely got better.
Yeah. What Liz Truss does with her predecessor's flagship levelling up policy will be watched carefully by some here. Today she told the nation, we need more investment and great jobs in every town and city across our country. Bolsover makes up part of the Red Wall, a belt of former Labour-leaning constituencies in the Midlands and the North that the party held for decades. A challenge facing Liz Truss is holding on to those seats when some polls suggest that the Tory popularity is waning in some of them. She's spoken about cutting taxes and boosting economic growth. But is that enough for Labour traditionalists who are now considering reverting back to their roots? Bev runs a small garment embroidery business and she's worried about paying her bills.
I am terrified. You know, we are in danger of losing the business without the stability that we need. With not knowing how much things are going to cost, I have money in the bank to see us through a couple of months, rainy day money. But if things don't change or costs carry on increasing, who knows?
It's okay. Unlike households, businesses aren't protected by an energy price cap.
We're expecting an announcement from the new Prime Minister Liz Truss this week about how she's going to help people with their energy bills. What is it that you would like to hear?
I'd like stability. I'd like to know that what the price we're paying is going to be for the foreseeable future. I mean, ideally to get us through winter, but if we can just know maybe whether that's a cap, I don't know, but something just to give us a stability so we can plan and budget going forward.
It's understood the PM will offer businesses some financial relief, but high inflation and dark memories of COVID lockdowns have deterred some sole proprietors from voting Tory again.
Hi.
Like Yvonne next door, who sells children's clothing and makes wedding dresses.
Your lights are off. Well, basically because of the energy bills, I can't afford to keep them on. It's already gone up, doubled for me, and obviously it's going again in October, which is really worrying for me. I doubt very much I'm going to be putting my heating on this winter, which is going to have an effect on brides because they have to get unchanged. So they're going to be very cold. So I'm trying to narrow it down to having the brides just in for 1 or 2 days maybe, so that I can just have the heating on then. And tell me about who you're going to be voting for in the next election. I am going to be voting Labour next time. I'll be honest, I did vote Conservative. I won't vote for them again. They've done nothing for me as a business, so I won't be voting for them again.
For decades, Labour's control of this town was as solid as the outline of the castle over its skyline. Boris Johnson changed that. The question now, can Liz Truss keep hold of her party's northern citadels?
Let's talk about the challenges ahead for the new Prime Minister. We have Bronwyn Maddox in the studio, director at Chatham House. That's an independent foreign affairs think tank, and formerly director of the Institute of Government, is that correct? Yeah.
For government, but never mind.
Institute for Government.
Let's not argue over that.
Nearly.
Thank you.
Samuel Kasumu is with us, who served as a special advisor to Boris Johnson and now seeks the London mayoral candidacy in 2024. And we have Conservative peer Lord Vasey. Welcome all of you. Thank you so much for giving up your time this evening. Bronwyn Maddox, how does Liz Truss, having slimmed down number 10, got rid of the delivery unit, assemble a team that can deliver all that she's promised this afternoon quickly?
It's very hard. I'm not sure. Honestly, she can do it. But she has done it with this great slogan of deliver, 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 and she probably said it a couple of more times. And yet, as you said, is getting rid of what Boris Johnson had assembled, finally, to try and help the delivery of his government, and that was the delivery unit, and a lot of the machinery of number 10 in it. What she's going to lean on, I think, and this is very interesting, is this new set of ministers. They are Truss loyalists. They very much believe, or say they believe, in the things that she does. And there was a sort of energy and a concentration among them all, I think, knowing that there isn't very long to the next election. And they have this phenomenal task.
And the crisis is now.
And the crisis is right now. And every bit of it begins and ends with a pound sign before you get on to abstractions like what she might do with Northern Ireland and the protocol and so on. Everything starts with the cost of living crisis that they are now in.
Samuel, you were in number 10. Obviously things have changed since you were there, but in so many ways. But what might be going on there tonight? What sort of conversations, what kind of atmosphere?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it sounds like it's going to be quite a different operation to the one that I worked in. Certainly when I was there, what you probably have had was the Chief of Staff, and a few other very senior officials trying to put together a team. Many politicos getting lost in the building because they hadn't worked there before. So you'll probably still have a bit of that. But I suspect because Liz is a very experienced politician, she's been in the cabinet and a minister for the best part of a decade, she'll probably be a bit more advanced than perhaps things were when I entered in 2019.
What do you think of the cabinet makeup so far? No, big name Sunak supporters.
Yeah, I think she's shown she's sort of not messing about, and whether that's a wise decision or not, time will tell. But she's
what do you think?
appointed.
Is it wise? You know.
I think it's on day one of your premiership not to reach out and try and create a bigger tent than she has created. I think is probably an error. It was quite clear that the great officers of state would go to her closest advisors and loyalists and some other key positions, but I think people were pointing out that Michael Ellis, as the Attorney General, is the first sort of out Rishi Sunak supporter to be appointed to a senior role in government. So, and I think losing someone like Grant Shapps, for example, who is, broadly speaking, although he backs Sunak, a pretty neutral guy who you can put in any department and know he'll do a good job. So I think she is going to incur the wrath of the Sunak loyalists, if you like to put it that way.
And what does that mean in practical
It just
terms?
makes it more difficult. I mean, you had the extraordinary...
No, but what does the wrath mean in practical terms?
Well, you had the extraordinary thing. I mean, Michael Gove is a mischievous man at the best of times, but you had the extraordinary interview I think he gave last week where he said, you know, he might not vote for a Liz Truss budget. Now, of course, he will vote for a Liz Truss budget, but it does show there are lots of people who are independently minded, whose political careers are over or have been effectively signalled by Liz Truss that their political careers are over, who will cause trouble from the backbenches.
But they still want to win the next election.
Yeah.
They still want to win, keep their job, don't they? To put it crudely.
Well, I think sometimes when you get into the life of a government that's been here for 12 years, there are some people who are resigned who think maybe the Tory party have lost. I mean, of course...
Sorry, they already think they've lost the next election?
I think there are quite a few MPs who think they've lost. That's certainly some of the talk in Westminster.
Right.
But you can certainly say that every Tory Prime Minister comes in promising to unite the party, and the party always says they'll be loyal to the Prime Minister. That, I'm afraid, has not been evidenced by the way Boris Johnson was treated, by the way Theresa May was treated. So I'm just reporting, as it were, on how the Tory party has behaved in the last 5 or 6 years.
Samuel, for someone like you want to be the Conservative mayoral candidate in 2024, I think I'm right in saying. I mean, does this today look like a renewed or refreshed Conservative party, having been in government for 12 years?
Yeah, I mean, I don't quite fully agree with Ed, although I'm a big fan of his, but I think that what you see at the moment is a relatively broad church, which is a Conservative party, represented in her cabinet. You've got the likes of Rob Buckland, Penny Mordaunt, who is certainly from the One Nation extraction, Nadeem Zahawi, who I worked very closely with on the vaccine deployment, is a very talented minister, and you have some other very talented people in the cabinet. But ultimately, Liz Truss has the best part of 18 months to convince the British public that she is the right person to lead the country moving forward. So it is within her gift and the right thing to do for her to pick the team that she thinks will give her the best chance at doing that.
Bronwyn, she's been very critical, pretty rude when it comes to civil servants, rude about them. And she is going to need them to help her deliver, isn't she?
Yes, she is. There's no way of doing it without them. She needs both her ministers and the civil servants, and for them to get on with each other and agree what it is that, you know, what they're trying to do and how to do it. She has been rude about them. She has signalled her intention to make do with many fewer of them, many fewer of the people around Number 10 and so on. But she can't do without them in the end. The question to me is how much of this quite controversial civil service reform programme that flickered through the Boris Johnson premiership, how much of that is going to carry on? I don't think they're going to have the bandwidth for an awful lot of that. So the risk is she's irritating these people, but has to work with them and yet doesn't have the bandwidth to make the changes that she and Boris Johnson said that she wanted to make.
Yeah, may not have the bandwidth, but those changes are important and necessary in the long term.
Yes, they are. I don't agree with everything that the Johnson government said, and not with all the missionary zeal, if you like, of Jacob Rees-Mogg on this particular subject, but many of the changes do need making.
OK. When you were watching that pivotal moment when a new Prime Minister makes the speech, makes the address to the nation outside Number 10, how did it make you feel as a Conservative peer? Honestly.
Well, look, I mean, I would say that, you know, for a start, Liz Truss won fair and square. She won the rules of the battle against... Well, it made me feel... It made me feel like the opening montage that you put on the front of Newsnight tonight, which is deja vu all over again. I mean, you could have written Liz Truss's... Well, you could have written Liz Truss's acceptance speech, broadly speaking, based on many other acceptance speeches. But what I would say is I thought it was interesting that she singled out the health service in terms of her priorities. We expected her, obviously, to talk about the energy crisis, and her entire leadership campaign has been defined by her economic strategy. Funnily enough, the health service did not get a huge amount of coverage during this leadership campaign, and it was very interesting that she singled it out, and she's put her probably her closest political friend,
in that role and made them Deputy Prime Minister at the same time. So I think that was the most interesting part of the speech for me.
Okay.
I found it very moving and striking for this reason, that power and success are really interesting commodity in politics. The difference between Liz Truss today and Liz Truss 24 hours ago is considerable. Half the world was writing pieces as if she had won, but not quite certain yet. And then the sheer difference of certainty.
Yes.
She stepped up and said, and the pressure, all that. The certainty of that, it changes it. Changes how people look at her, changes how she behaves.
Top 4 offices of state, none held by a white man, never happened before. Does that matter, Samuel?
I mean, role models matter. I think this is the culmination of a lot of hard work that began with Tory modernisers like Ed and David Cameron. And I think this shows that the Conservative Party, well, what I know, which is that the Conservative Party is one where you could go as far as your gifts and talents can take you. But of course, there is a broader challenge, which is how do you ensure that people from different backgrounds feel like the Conservative Party is one that they may want to vote for during a general election. And that's not just for minority ethnic communities, but also younger people who may feel like actually they've had a really tough 12 years and there's a lack of I guess, opportunity when it comes to things like being able to purchase your own home and things like that.
A lot to do. Thank you very much, Samuel. Bronwyn, Lord Vasey. I can't call you Ed, it just doesn't, it sounds far too familiar, but thank you very much for coming on the programme.
I can't believe you called me Ed.
Right, let's take a look at some of the front pages. We'll start with The Sun. Hello, Liz. Obviously, it's Liz meeting the Queen. And the Queen is smiling and they are shaking hands at Balmoral. The Daily Mirror, now fix the Britain you lot broke. Liz Truss did say in her speech today, didn't she? Firstly, I will get Britain working again. Daily Telegraph, we can ride out the storm. The Guardian, into the storm. Truss vows to solve the cost of living crisis. And the Times, again, we can ride out the storm. That is it from us tonight. Kirsty will be in Sheffield tomorrow for a special programme on the energy price crisis as we await still the details of the government's plan. Do join her then. Have a lovely evening. Goodbye.
Thank you all very much. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you.